Welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz, a program where we discuss happenings in this, the most fertile spot on the planet for new ideas. I'm your host, Seth Shostak, and the producer is Janet Wu. Tonight, illegal immigration, or if you prefer, undocumented workers. What's the story here in the Bay Area? And do local authorities cooperate with federal programs? And if not, why not? And finally, what are we going to do something practical and realistic about the problems here? I'll be talking about this with my guests, and they are Jeff Rosen, who's the district attorney for Santa Clara County. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And Oscar Garcia. Oscar is the CEO of the Mountain View Chamber of Commerce. Oscar, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, just a little bit of background information here. How many people are we talking about? I've read numbers that say that the number of undocumented immigrants here in the United States total is somewhere between 6 and 30 million people. That's a pretty big error range there. Do we have any better numbers for California?
About 10% of the population of California are undocumented immigrants. So in Santa Clara County, which has about 1.8 million people, you're talking about 180,000 undocumented immigrants.
So the percentage here in Santa Clara County reflects the percentage throughout the
yes,
throughout
the state, yes.
Okay, and what's happening to that number, Jeff? Do you know? Is it going up? Is it going down?
Well, the latest figures that I've read in terms of the amount of immigrants, specifically from Mexico to the United States, has been going down over the last few years, and there's different hypotheses or reasons for that, but the number seems to be going down. And when you take account the folks that come over the border and then the folks that are living here and then go back to Mexico, it also greatly reduces those numbers.
Do you have any ideas about what's stabilized this, or maybe it's always been stable and nobody noticed that it was a stable percentage?
I think some of the things that have contributed to probably the decline is certainly has been the some of the fear and some of the laws that have been passed in terms of decreasing some of the numbers.
Well, I'm told that there's a professor at Princeton University. His name is Douglas Massey. And he says that part of the reason that we have this problem is, misguided enforcement efforts designed to limit the number of people coming across the border. The number of people coming across the border is definitely down. Part of that is that 850-mile fence between, Brownsville, Texas, and San Diego. I mean, it's kind of segmented, so there's that. There's also the fact that construction work has been down during the recession and so forth and so on. But what he's saying is that, in fact, we keep people from going back who want to go back. And that, in fact, all these border control efforts are resulting in more people staying here who otherwise would go back. He estimates 2 million fewer Mexicans would be living in the United States if it weren't for all this attempt to control the border. Any thoughts on that? Is that true?
To be honest with you, I don't quite understand what the professor is talking about. There's not a difficulty in leaving the United States to go to another country. The difficulty is in coming back. So if he means that more people would leave this country if it was easier for them to come back, then maybe I understand, but it sounds like his point was something different, which I don't understand.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't think foreign countries, Mexico or Latin America or European countries, I don't think they're saying no to their nationals returning back home.
Anybody can walk back? Well, apparently, though, it's harder to walk back across the border. I'm told that's harder than it was because it's a fee or whatever, and the controls, whatever. Okay, well, that seems to be a red herring, so we'll just forget about that. What about the issue that's always made about the costs? Are the undocumented workers in this country contributing to the economy? Are they a drain on the economy? And you can read articles on both sides of this, from which I gather that it's a bit of a wash, that in fact it's obviously somewhere close to being in equilibrium. It's neither a drain nor a benefit.
Well, so when you have an undocumented worker, sometimes they are they have to, or they report taxes, and because you need a Social Security number, whether it's a valid or not valid. You also pay sales taxes like we do everyone, and it's a lot of times they're not able to. In fact, it's illegal to be able to claim and do your income tax if you don't have the proper documentation to do that. On the flip side, you're right. They're also looking at some of the services that they use. But again, just recently, in fact, some of the numbers that I looked is overall across the country, undocumented workers are actually contributing more into the system than what they are taking back from it.
Some of the numbers I've heard, Oscar, the two things that are frequently cited, and I'm sure you know this, but one is the cost to healthcare, because the undocumented workers, very often will have to just walk into an emergency room in a hospital for care because that's the only option for them. They can't be turned away and so forth. They may not have insurance. And that's estimated at about something like $7 billion a year for the country, not for California, and $10 billion a year for education because they're going to schools. Are these numbers fair? I mean, are these fair numbers? These are big numbers.
Well, I think they're big numbers, but I sort of agree with the original premise of your question, which is that I've read a lot of figures about undocumented workers and whether they're a net benefit or a net drain on our economy, and I often really see, I think it's sort of a wash. I think that yes, there's certainly costs to educating and taking care of people, as of course there are, but I think the fact that they're paying into the system and not receiving Social Security, not receiving other benefits that American citizens would receive, probably makes it work out to about a wash.
I would say that the education benefit, I mean, yes, that may be an expense, but on the other hand, you get educated people. That's got to pay off in the long term, right? I mean,
and that, I think, is probably an issue that we need to look at and address. I mean, the bottom line is that I think one of the reasons why we're having this discussion is because of the fact that we do have an immigration system that is failing. And it's an antiquated immigration system. We are now and have been for many years, this country competing at a global scale. And we are no longer, Silicon Valley is not just Silicon Valley competing against the East Coast or other parts of the country. We are competing globally. And I think the more educated workforce that we have, the better it is, and how it is that we address those issues from an immigration standpoint, whether folks that are here already undocumented or those that are coming to this country on a temporary visa and then perhaps maybe need to return back. The bottom line is I think we need to have an immigration system that, again, educates and creates opportunities for these skilled workforce to be here, because that's what employers need in this country.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about, in fact, the local situation. Oscar, you're with the Mountain View Chamber of Commerce, so you're aware of the local economy. To what extent is it being, are undocumented workers involved in the local economy? If there are as many as 180,000 in Santa Clara County, are they in particular sectors? Are they distributed throughout the economy? What's the status? Well,
I think we're going to, here in Santa Clara County in the Bay Area, it's really going to mirror across the country. A lot of undocumented workers, you're going to find them in the service sector. That's where the majority of them are. You will also find a smaller percentage of undocumented workers, those that have come to this country, again, on a visa, and the visa has expired. Maybe they were working for a high-tech company that sponsored, and after the sponsorship ended, they chose not to return back to the country, so now they're here undocumented. And some of those could be either still working maybe in some of the high-tech, higher-skilled jobs, but that's going to be a smaller percentage. So that's where I think you're going to find a lot of the undocumented workers.
I think one point that that should be made is the fact that people want to immigrate to this country is a good thing, because it means they want to come here because this is a good place to live. People don't want to immigrate to North Korea. People want to leave North Korea. People want to come to the United States because it's a land of opportunity, and so that's actually a good thing about that reflects well on us.
But what would you say, Jeff, to people who say, yes, that's fine? A lot of people want to come to the United States. Fine, I can understand it.
We all came here from someplace else.
I'm not Cherokee or whatever. They came as well. But the argument is, yes, but they got in line, whatever that meant at the time. So what do you say to people who say, well, okay, but then they should, fill out the forms and do what everybody else does, as opposed to just walking in?
Well, I think that gets back to what Oscar was saying about having an immigration system that's more functional. But I think that if you go back in American history, for everybody who came here, I think it would be very difficult for anyone to say that, oh, I did everything by the book and I didn't, fib or lie about anything to come here. I mean, that's really It's really a very old story in that sense. But of course, I do agree is that in fairness, and that's why we need to have something that's a little more functional.
What about local institutions? You're more in law enforcement, you're more connected with the economy, but of course, undocumented workers, I mean, the people that come across the border, they're violating federal laws. So that's
Correct.
ICE, that's the Immigration and Customs Enforcement
Correct.
Agency. So they're doing their federal thing, but we're doing our local thing. And the two don't always mesh. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's correct. We've had a situation in our county and in other communities in the United States, but particularly in our county, where there hasn't been the kind of cooperation between federal immigration authorities and our local communities that I would like.
well, give me an example of what you mean. I mean,
Well, I think an example of that is that while the vast majority of undocumented immigrants that are here are law-abiding, as law-abiding in the sense of they're not out committing robbery or burglary or murder, as are the vast majority of citizens that live in this country are law-abiding. There is a small percentage that commit serious and violent crimes, and after they serve their jail or prison sentences, should be deported. Our Board of Supervisors has taken the position that they're not in any way going to cooperate with ICE. And as the district attorney and the chief law enforcement officer of this county, I don't approve of that. The United States government it's a lawful government. This is a democracy, and I think there's a way that we can work with ICE to try to make our communities more secure.
well, it seems to me that you're possibly referring to the Secure Communities Program.
Yes.
Have I jumped the gun here? Okay, the Secure Communities Program. Now, this is a Department of Homeland Security program, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so what they're saying is, look, if you put somebody, the state or whatever, put somebody in jail for a murder or whatever, they're going to take the fingerprints. Of course, they're going to do that, and they'll distribute those fingerprints to federal agencies that that control. I mean, looking for criminals, whatever, just the criminal
Yes.
databases. But they're saying. I'm sorry, let me get this right. We put somebody in a state prison, then those fingerprints are taken, and the feds say they want those fingerprints to check them against a database they have of illegal immigrants to make sure that they're not here illegally, in which case they might take them out and deport them, right?
Yes, everything you said is correct, except that it's done at the local level, at the jail level. That's really where the issue is. When someone goes to state prison after they serve their prison sentence, if they're not in this country lawfully, they'll in general be automatically turned over to the immigration authorities.
Okay, so the local authorities are told, we want to check your prisoners.
Yes.
Okay, and you think they should have that right, and not everybody agrees with you.
Yes, I think that when you said if somebody's in jail for murder or whatever, I think the whatever part is the important part here, because my position that I've kind of written about and spoken about is for individuals that commit serious or violent offenses like murder, we should be cooperating with ICE, and after those people serve their prison sentences, to then deport them. However, people that commit minor offenses, petty theft, driving on a suspended license, trespassing, I don't think that people like that should be deported. I don't think that contributes to public safety. So that's the debate that I'm having with the Board of Supervisors, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to resolve it.
Okay. Now, when you say somebody who is in jail for a minor offense, right? I mean, that's not 1% of them. That's a fair fraction. A lot of them are in there for things that aren't terribly serious crimes, right? So there's a kind of a unfairness about the system, wouldn't you agree? In that they're all subject to deportation, no matter the degree of their crime.
Well, let me just take one step back here. I think that, to be fair, I don't work for Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. I'm not their spokesperson. But I think it's fair to say that for the last several years, the net that they cast was too broad in terms of the people they were deporting. And I think they've heard that message from communities all across the country, including our community. And I think that more recently they've narrowed their focus on deporting individuals that have committed serious or violent offenses, because that actually contributes to public safety. Deporting someone that's committed a burglary or a robbery or a murder ultimately contributes to our public safety. I think that deporting people that commit minor offenses just sows fear within immigrant communities and doesn't contribute anything to our safety.
All right, so how do you see this thing ending up, say, a year from now?
I'm hopeful that a year from now we'll have crafted a policy in the county where we're cooperating with ICE to the extent that they're asking for information about serious or violent criminals, and otherwise they're not asking us for information about minor offenders.
All right. You know, we have, thanks to the assiduous work of the KMVT staff, we have some roll-ins, as they're called, some videos here that'll take us out of the studio and into some very interesting company. To begin with, there's one of Jose Antonio Vargas, who was part of a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting team at the Washington Post. And last summer, in the summer of 2011, he published a rather shocking article, at least it shocked a lot of people, in the New York Times, in which he said, hey, I'm an undocumented immigrant, and here I am, I'm working for the Washington Post, and just to show you, you know, you're railing against these people. I am one of them, and I'm doing a good job here. So there was a bit of an interview with him here in Mountain View. Maybe we can roll the video of Jose Antonio Vargas.
Immigration is probably one of the most fundamentally misunderstood issues in this country. Like, we don't even know how the process works. Like, for somebody like me, there's no line for me to get in the back of. There's no way for somebody like me, who's a college graduate, who's benefited from this country, who's been paying taxes to this country, to make myself legal. There's no line for me to get in the back of, right? Can you imagine how many other people, there's an estimated 11 million undocumented people in this country. Thousands, unknown thousands here, kind of in the Bay Area alone. And part of why I did what I did is to kind of, again, have a truthful conversation about what we're talking about and to figure out what we can agree on and how do we focus on solutions. We know there's an immigration problem. We all know that. We talk about it all the time, but we never talk about the solution. We never talk about how can we all come to the same table and see, all right, how do we fix this?
All right, now, that's quite a, I mean, he makes some very obvious points. He says, look, what am I supposed to do? Right? He's not violating laws. He's got a good job. He's a reporter, and so forth. No line for him to get in back of. Oscar, what should this guy do?
I agree with Jose Antonio, and it goes back to the point that I had made earlier. Here's a gentleman who has contributed and also has benefited, like you said, from our education system and other services that we provide in this country. Yet he also is a very skilled, very talented person that given the opportunity will legitimately be able to, or legally be able to, continue to contribute to society. And just like Jose Antonio Vargas, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of folks across this country, let alone others that are much younger, that are coming up, that are going to hit a roadblock eventually when it comes to being able to fully contribute to society. And like I said, also from a talent standpoint, I look at it just very practical. If I'm an employer and this guy has the talent that I want, what can I do as an employer to get him hired legally? And that's where the federal government is failing.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into this a little bit later. I think that maybe we should go to the second roll-in here, which is also interesting. These are interviews that were made at a Mountain View Civility Roundtable entitled Undocumented Workers. Civility Roundtable. I guess they want everybody to be civil. Anyhow, that was held here in Mountain View, and the residents listened to a panel of speakers discussing immigration issue, the pros, the cons, the issues, and then sort of expounded on their thoughts. So our cameramen were there and made this little bit of opinion.
Well, it started out, we should deport them all, and you know, that's not a solution. Let's talk about a solution.
This is not a new problem. It's over 100 years old. People coming into the country illegally, looking for work, looking for a better life, and crossing a border that we've defined. Now, if there's going to be a border and a law, then you need to enforce it. But you also need to face the reality that the people are here, and you need to find a way to consider how to deal with it.
But I think that they should be recognized in these courageous efforts that they take in survival, really, because why do people immigrate? They're leaving somewhere that they're not comfortable with.
I know they came here to do better for themselves, and our leaders in Washington are disappointing the 280 million Americans and the 20 million who want to be Americans by not doing anything. I mean, they're allowing a system to fester, and it doesn't help either side, you know.
I've been more sympathetic to the plight of immigrants, and I think I was confused by that at first because a few years ago, when they were rounding up illegal immigrants, and but then they opened a day worker center, so it was all very confusing, like what's right and what's wrong.
The problem is real. We're not dealing with it, and it's not a new problem.
All right, you heard the man. In fact, all the men and the women too. We're not doing anything about this. Why are we not doing it? If you were to take this as a representative sample of the citizenry of this country, you would say people want something to be done. They want something reasonable, something practical, something fair. I don't see the DREAM Act, which would provide some sort of line for, let's say, Antonio to get into. I don't see it happening. Why is it not happening? What should happen?
I tend to, I don't know if that's a representative sample.
Probably
or
not.
Or
they
not.
were
I mean,
invited, they self-selected.
No, the only reason I'd say is that I would say one thing that's helpful about what was just shown is that people have a sense that they shouldn't be prejudiced against immigrants in a way that maybe 20 or 30 years ago they would have felt much more comfortable saying, yeah, deport them all, send all the Mexicans back, they don't speak English, get them out of here. And I think there has been a change in public attitudes because there's so many immigrants here and because people have had contact with folks from all over the world and particularly from Mexico. And so I think there's less prejudice against those folks than there was before. But it's still a little bit of a thorny issue.
Oscar?
Well, Seth, personally, I think the reason why nothing's being done is because I think our leadership in Washington lacks, like we say in Spanish, lacks the huevos or the cojones to really stand forth and take the bull by the horn. This is, like the gentleman said, this is a problem that's been going on for over 100 years, and it's an ebb and flow. My father was, the reason how he was able to get his green card was through the Bracero program, which I kind of equated to our modern day H-1 visa program. Why was that? Because at that time in the 50s and 60s, the farmers here in this country needed cheap labor. And so we as a country, the U.S., would reach out to Mexico and other Latin American countries, and we would open up the opportunity for them to come and work here in our farms. And those jobs started to go away, and all of a sudden we kind of stopped that, and now we need high-skilled workers, so let's do the H-1 visa.
Oscar, if you were put in charge of this, you became the immigration czar tomorrow morning, how would you describe, give me a 3-sentence description, sure 5, of what that policy would entail? What would be the main points?
Well, first of all, Seth, I would decline the immigration czar position. I would rather take on the opportunity position, because that's what this country is about. It's about creating opportunity. And like Jeff said, people are coming to this country because it continues to be the land of opportunity, and that is what we need to preserve. We need to preserve the entrepreneurial spirit in this country and allow immigrants, allow people that are here in this country to flourish and prosper and create more jobs for this country.
Okay, so, but what would you do? Would you say, look, if you've been here more than X number of years or whatever, then there's going to be this path to citizenship, and if not, you go back, or everybody gets a chance? I mean, is there something we could all agree on? Is there something that's politically realistic that could happen in the next, next administration?
I think one of the most practical things that can be done is to go back to the DREAM Act. That truly is a very practical solution. I think something that we, the majority of us, can agree on. These are an opportunity for folks that have been educated in this country. We, as a country, have already invested a lot into these students. And again, from a business standpoint, if I've already invested my time and money into someone, I want something back.
Yeah.
Well, I think one other point to be made here is, at all of these discussions in this country about immigration and what to do about it, we tend to be very focused on what we should do about it as the United States of America, as Americans, and there's a certain sense in which that's appropriate. Of course, the reason we've had this issue for 100 years is because Mexico is not producing jobs for its people. It doesn't have an equitable distribution of wealth. It's a very corrupt place. They're almost in a civil war, and of course people are leaving there. And so partly, one thing that we try to do as the United States is we try to promote democracy and capitalism around the world, and certainly we need to try to continue to do that in Mexico. And that's a country with vast natural resources, and there's really no reason that people should have to leave there to feed themselves.
Well, again, bring Professor Massey back into this conversation, but he notes that indeed the economy is, despite the violence, the economy in Mexico is improving and the birth rates are going down, and so that the incentive to go into some country that's next door is lessening. I mean, is this not any different than, say, 100 years ago when people were fleeing Russia, right, because the Tsar had these terrible policies? I mean, is it fundamentally different? Very, very quickly.
I don't think we're going to be having this conversation about immigration from Mexico in 20 years because of falling birth rates, as you described, and hopefully better economic conditions in Mexico. I don't think we'll be having this discussion. If anything, I think we might be encouraging people to come here from Mexico because we need more laborers for our aging population.
Oscar?
I actually disagree with Jeff. I think we will continue to have this. Here in this country, we will have a family uproot themselves, a white-collar professional across the country for a 5 or 10% salary increase. When there's such a huge disparity of 300% salary increase between what a worker is earning in Latin America versus here, you're going to continue to have those discussions.
Okay, well, I don't know. It sounds like there's a bet on the table. We'll just have to find out. This has been extremely enlightening discussion of a very volatile subject, and for that I'd like to thank my two guests, Jeff Rosen, Oscar Garcia, and thanks also to our hardworking KMVT staff and our truly tireless producer, Janet Wu. I'm Seth Shostak, inviting you to join us each month from Stories for Stories from the Silicon Valley on Silicon Valley Buzz. Thanks for watching. Good night.